Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining tonight's virtual forum event hosted by the Institute of Politics and Public Service at the McCourt School of Public Policy, known to many of you as Geopolitics. My name is Joshua Marin Mora, and I am a senior in the School of Foreign Service studying international politics and minoring in Latin American studies. It is my distinct pleasure to be streaming live from my home here in Reno in the great state of Nevada. Yep, that's how we pronounce it here, where I was proudly born and raised. Throughout my time at Georgetown, I have had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with geopolitics, from being a participant in its pre-orientation program to being able to observe elections in Mexico to serving in its student leadership council, and of course, attending numerous discussion groups with incredible fellows like Jose Diaz-Balart and Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, among many others. I am pleased to introduce our guest tonight, my own Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of the great state of Nevada. Senator Cortez Masto is the first Latina ever elected to the United States Senate and is the first female senator from the great state of Nevada. We are thrilled to have the senator here with us tonight to discuss policy challenges facing vulnerable communities in the wake of COVID-19 and share what she has learned about the importance of diverse leadership. Please join the conversation on social media using the hashtag #CortezMasto at GU and by tagging GU Politics at GU Politics. Tonight's event will be moderated by GU Politics' Executive Director, Mo Alethi, who is going to kick us off. Thank you.
Joshua, thanks so much for that great introduction. It's been a pleasure watching your leadership grow over the past few years at Georgetown and GU Politics. So we're thrilled to have you with us tonight. I want to welcome everyone who is watching us tonight here on Zoom, as well as on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Here on Zoom, we've got members of the Georgetown community, but also excited to have students and members of the community from a couple of Nevada universities, UNLV and University of Nevada at Reno are also participating. So welcome and thank you for joining us. And so everyone is aware the video is being recorded and will be posted for viewing later. I have always been very interested in the issue that we're going to be focused on tonight, and that's diversity in public service. As a person of color myself, who spent most of my career working in the political trenches, looking around and seeing a lack of representation always struck me on the political side, on the policy side. And so tonight we're thrilled to be joined by Senator Cortez Masto to talk about some of these issues. She's well versed in them. She has spent her career fighting for issues and fighting for members of underrepresented communities. As Joshua said, the first Latina ever in the United States Senate, up until just a few minutes ago, reportedly being considered for vice president to be running mate on Joe Biden's ticket. So now we're going to get to that in this conversation. But we're excited to sort of dig deep and dive deep into some of these issues. Here's how it's going to work. For those of you that are participating on Zoom, you'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button. Click on that to start typing in your questions. You can start populating them with that tab with your questions now. Keep an eye on the chat as well, because at a certain point, our staff will let you know when you're up to ask your question about halfway through the program. Once we select you and your question, get ready, because we're going to put you on camera, so make sure you look your best. And so with that, I think that's all the housekeeping. Senator Cortez Masto, welcome to the Institute of Politics and Public Service.
Thank you. I am excited to be here with all of you. I look forward to our conversation.
I want to talk a little bit about policy. I want to talk a little bit about pipeline. I want to talk a little bit about politics. But let's start tonight, actually, by talking about you. And tell us a little bit about your own path into public service and sort of what inspired you and what the call was for you personally into public service.
Yeah, you know, I probably didn't realize it at the time, but came to appreciate it as I got older. But my father was in local politics. My mother and father both were always actively engaged in the community and in civic engagement and the political side of it. And this is a couple who, like any couple, struggling when they first get married. My father was a parking attendant at the old Dunes Hotel and Casino here when my sister and I were little, and my mother was a bookkeeper for a title company. And but they were always involved and engaged in making sure that around the dinner table we were talking about social issues, policy issues, what was happening in the community. And then at the time, as we got older, and my parents made sure that my sister and I really graduated from college. But in my household, it wasn't a question of if we go to college. It was, no, you're going to go to college and graduate, and then you can decide what you want to do. But as we grew up, my father continued and mother continued to grow in their professions. And so my father went on to be a county commissioner when I was younger here in Clark County for about 16 years. And that really was an opening for both me and my sister to understand what it means for good government, what it means to give back in your community, what it means to listen to your neighbors and your community members about the challenges that they're facing and how working together you can solve those problems. And so then he went on to be, my father went on to a career as the president and CEO of the Convention and Visitors Authority. Many of you know that tagline, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, that was part of his marketing team when he was the president and CEO. So not only is it a success story when I talk about, because my father is Mexican-American, grew up in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and at a young age was brought to Las Vegas by his parents. My grandmother, a Mexican-American woman, was born and raised in Las Cruces, but my grandfather's from Chihuahua. And he crossed the Rio Grande as a young man, coming to this country, served in our military, and became a United States citizen. And so it really was a story of trying to come to a country, do right, work hard, play by the rules so that your family can succeed. And that's what my parents did, and worked hard so that my sister and I could succeed. But all the while, my father never forgot where he came from, and my mother as well, and who helped them get there. And that's what my sister and I learned growing up. So even though I fought it, I'll be honest with you, I went to UNR, graduated from University of Nevada, Reno, went on to law school at Gonzaga. It just felt natural for me to get back into public policy, the legal aspects of it, and being involved in the community. I so believe in good government. I believe in working with one another to solve problems. And that is why I do what I do today. If you had asked me when I was in college, is this where you think you want to be? I would say no, but it was a natural path for me. And that's why I truly believe why I do what I do today, because I grew up in it with my parents. I saw the benefits of it. And that's my passion. And that's what really motivates me, is really solving problems in the community, figuring out how we work on this together. I don't think compromise is a bad word. I think we all come together for that reason, to figure out where we can focus on public policy that's good for all of us, and that we come together in that process, working together through compromise. So that's a little bit about my background and why I'm doing what I do today.
I'm going to come back to parts of your background as the conversation progresses. But you have been obviously not just your election was not just historic, being the first Latina ever elected to the U.S. Senate, but you have really used your platform to fight for diversity and fight for underrepresented communities on a whole host of issues. I know you are also a softball player, so I'm going to toss a softball to you right now. Why does it matter? Why does it matter to have more diversity in public policy, in public service?
It is so important. Here's why. Because if we are going to pass laws in this country that really address the issues we are all dealing with, or trying to solve the problems we are dealing with, then we need that diversity around the table when we're making those decisions, when we are crafting that legislation or those laws, because otherwise people are going to be left out. That's what it means to me. And that's why I realize my election was historic, and that's great to make history. But to me, the most important part is now I can be at the table. a voice at the table, have a seat there when we're addressing legislation that I know that impact people in my community. And at the same time, part of my responsibility is opening that door even wider and bringing more people through it and more diversity. But it really is, it starts with, if we are going to pass laws, if we are going to focus on public policy that impacts all of us, then we need to have that diversity in the room making those decisions. And it's very simple. And this is what I've always felt as I've worked in government is, if we are actually going to do right by our constituents while we're working in government, the government and the people that work in government should really mirror the constituency they represent. Because that way you understand the issues, you can understand and be empathetic about what they're dealing with and bring those issues to the table when you're trying to find solutions. And let me say what's crazy about all of this is, when I got to the Senate, you could probably count on, two hands? Probably, let me think about this. There were under about 22 women that were in the United States Senate. Only 22 women. Now think of this, over 200-year history of the United States Senate. There were only ever 50 women in the United States Senate. I know that because I was number 50. So this is why this is so crazy. This idea that people are passing laws and legislation, and it's an elite group of that are trying to address the issues that matter to me as a woman, but also matter to so many communities of color, so many of our communities that are being discriminated against. How do we expect them to address those issues unless we're there in the room making those decisions? And so that, to me, is what this is all about. Is making sure we're opening that door. We all have that responsibility to make sure we bring people with us and bring that diversity.
The COVID crisis is maybe one of the most important, timely examples of this. We've seen all the data of how minority communities of color are disproportionately affected, not just on the public health side, but also the economic side, right? That they're just put a spotlight on the structural disparities, both in healthcare and economic with communities of color. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, about the real policy challenges there, and what, being a woman of color, what perspective you bring to that conversation as you figure out how to move forward.
Right. Part of this starts with the data, and you just talked about it. Now we have data, now we know, but we didn't have the data initially. And we didn't actually ask for that data. We didn't actually demand that demographic, that characters, whatever it is, that we're collecting that from the very beginning. And federal government doesn't do enough of collection of that type of data to be specific so that we can ensure that we're bringing resources to everyone equally. That is the challenge still at the federal level, and including in some of our state level governments as well. But we know now, during this pandemic, in particular Nevada, I've seen it. Nevada has grown to be a beautifully diverse state. If you don't know anything about Nevada, there's 3 million people, but a third of the population are Latinos. We have one of the fastest growing Asian American Pacific Islander populations, still a very strong and robust African American population. We have over 23 tribal communities throughout this state, and it's just beautifully diverse. And what I was seeing, and after talking with our state healthcare experts, was that some members in our minority community were being hard hit by this pandemic. And particularly what we know now in Nevada is our Latino community was getting really hard hit, meaning we were seeing more numbers of COVID-19 diagnosis, not enough healthcare access to that community, not enough education to make sure the community members know what they can do to protect themselves. And so once we got that data, then we could work together at the state level, the local level, and the federal level to kind of figure out, now, how do we educate? How do we get the resources where they need to be in those hot spots? And how do we make sure we're communicating? As you all know, particularly in our Asian American communities and Latino communities, sometimes there's a language barrier. And so you have to be able to make sure you're connecting and understand and knock down those barriers to bring the resources into those communities. So for me, as somebody, not only as a woman of color come from a Mexican-American father. My mother's Italian-American. But working in the communities and realizing the language barrier, realizing the lack of access sometimes to healthcare, realizing the lack of access to really clean air sometimes and clean water. And some of our neighborhoods are low income and they're challenged already. And so we have to recognize that to be able to then to fight to get the resources where they need to go. Because we have the data now at the federal level, I have been advocating along with some of my colleagues that we now ensure that the resources that we need to address this pandemic get into those communities. So how do we do that? We find where there are local clinics. We find where there are local areas, like in Southern Nevada, the Cardenas Market is one place where a lot of Latinos shop, where we can go and educate them and bring those resources to them and talk to them so that they are educated on these issues. But I will tell you, every time we think that we make one step forward in addressing any type of discrimination or a barrier to getting access to healthcare or any type of relief to individuals, somebody's going to come along and try to take it away. And we have that happening right now. Literally, it astounds me, this administration. We've fought so many years to tear down those barriers for discrimination around housing, around healthcare, around education. And now this administration has rolled back some of these regulations. And now we see, unfortunately, more of the easier ability to discriminate. And let me give you an example. Right now, just out today, where we know that under the Affordable Care Act, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, in the middle of a pandemic, decides to rewrite the regulation under the Affordable Care Act and roll back some of the discriminatory laws that we put in place, anti-discriminatory laws that we put in place to protect individuals. They're rolling those back. So that means that certain individuals now will be discriminated against and not get the health care they need under the Affordable Care Act. Women, LGBTQ, people of color. If you have a language barrier, sorry, you're out of luck. So that to me is why when we fight to be at the table and we pass legislation, we have to be vigilant around it to make sure that we're constantly talking about these issues. Because even though you may pass a law that addresses some sort of discrimination, and I know this on banking and housing where I sit because I've tried to eliminate redlining in housing issues, and that's been rolled back by this administration as well. We have to be vigilant because we have to be back there fighting it again. It's this constant awareness of what's going on to ensure that we're bringing those equal resources everywhere.
Just a reminder for those from the Georgetown community and the other universities, you can begin to submit your questions at the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen at any point during the program, so feel free to start submitting them. Yeah, Senator, we could have this same conversation about a whole host of issues, climate change, education. One other one I want to focus on, just given current events, is criminal justice. And when you look at the tragic death of George Floyd up in Minnesota, or Ahmaud Arbery, under very different circumstances, but where it took months for prosecutors to really pay attention to what had happened in that case, the disparities once again are tragically evident. You're a former prosecutor. Talk a little bit about some of those challenges and how more diversity in positions of power and public service could help address some of them.
Yeah, I think that's why it's so important you bring that diversity at all levels. Because I know as a prosecutor, one of the things that we looked in our state, and particularly as the Attorney General, was our state prison system. What was going on? Why were there just disproportionate share of minorities, or people of color in the prison system? What was happening here, and what can we do to bring change to this? And so we looked at the state level of changing some of our laws to address what we were seeing, that disproportionate share of people of color in our prison system. Was it enough? No, I think more needs to be done. I think what we are seeing across the country, this is completely outrageous to me, that you have a man of color who can't jog down the street, or a woman sleeping in her bed is killed, or what we just saw recently in Minnesota with Lloyd George. It's outrageous, and it requires and it mandates justice. But at the same time, it also mandates us all not to sit back and say, oh, there it goes again, there it happens again, to demand change. We need a paradigm shift here. We need this change. We need to recognize that it's happening and then figure out what we're going to do about it. But we all collectively can no longer just sit back, and we have to say and do and demand that change. Yes, we want swift justice. Yes, we want to stop this discrimination, but we've got to work collectively at all levels to address it. And I think that's why, for everybody who's watching, no matter what field you work in, you bring that with you. You bring that sense of change, that sense of diversity, that sense of justice with you. And that will help make the change as well. I've always felt that way, no matter what job that I've held. It is important that you carry that responsibility with you and treat people equally, with respect, with tolerance, and you call it out when you see it. But, you know, as a country, we unfortunately, we have so much more to do. It does not help, let me just add this, that we have a man in the White House that thinks it's okay to discriminate and call people out and use hateful bullying language in the highest office of the land. And so I have always said there's no room for hate or discrimination in the White House, particularly from the President of the United States, who's supposed to represent the best of us, represent all of us. That's what we expect. That's what we demand. I don't see that now in this White House. And to me, that change starts at the election box in November, quite honestly.
Barack Obama's election was clearly historic, but racism didn't go away.
Right.
And, you know, I'm wondering if, and you occasionally hear criticisms of him from the Black community that he didn't go far enough. I'm wondering if that's an unfair criticism, not just of him, but you know, as a person of color, as a woman, do you feel undue pressure from the communities you represent? Do you feel that people are judged differently, or that there are higher expectations for you in dealing with some of these challenges?
You know, that is a great question. I've never looked at it from that perspective, because the only thing I know and true to me is I'm a woman. So I've dealt with the issues and it's the only issues I know to deal with it from my perspective as a woman, as a Mexican-American woman, an Italian-American woman, and what I've had to deal with throughout my career. But I will say this, and this is what I say to so many people when I talk with them, and particularly when I'm talking with communities of color, I don't know what it's like to stand in your shoes, and you don't know what it's like to stand in mine. But if we stand together, we can be a force to make change. And that's, to me, what it's about. It is about this listening, understanding, education around issues that are impacting our communities. And let me just give you an example of this. I've worked my career around domestic violence prevention, sex trafficking preventions, reducing violence against women and children. I know as a woman that what I've had to deal with around this issue. But I also know a man doesn't think about it from the perspective that I do as a woman. I, as a woman, know that I am very cautious when I'm walking to my car at the parking lot at night, because I have concerns about being attacked, possibly raped or harassed. A man doesn't have that same concern. And so what our obligation is to, as a woman, to educate, like I do with my husband and my friends, to educate them what it's like in my shoes, to understand what I live with every day, so that now they can have a better understanding, and together we can work to make change. And I think that's what it comes down to. Oftentimes, we jump all the way to the wanting it and demanding an end result, but we forget the education piece. We forget to make people understand what it is we're dealing with, how we come along through this process. And I think that people are, I'm not saying everybody's open and willing to do it, but there are so many people that just want to be educated and understand it, and then they would be there with us. And so a part of what I've always done is that piece of education. I think it gets discounted quite often. We never fund it enough, but it always starts for me with that education piece.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting to hear you say that, you know, because one of the things that was really stark for me back when I was working in politics was the increased otherization in our politics. the number of focus groups I sat in where people would talk about their concerns, how their own livelihood was in direct competition with others. The anger that you feel that these communities over here, if we're talking about them, then you're not talking about me. If we're putting more funding into this community, that's coming away from us. And it feels to me that too often political leaders don't do what you just talked about, connecting the dots, right? We're not in competition. Just because we're trying to take care of the economic disparities in the Black or the brown communities does not mean it has to come at your expense or vice versa. How do we bridge that divide?
I think it goes back to what you just said. It's a great, you just touched on it. We have to stop making it us versus them. We have to, when we are passing legislation or we are looking at appropriation, at least in Congress, we have to make sure we're thinking and talking in terms of all of us. This benefits all of us, and explaining how it benefits all of us. And we don't do enough of that, particularly in this environment. It's so partisan, it's so fast moving, and we don't get enough of that piece of education and bringing people along. That's why for my purposes, I love going out into my communities and just talking to people, because I know I will find common ground. I know that no matter where I show up, I'm willing to talk with you. If you're willing to sit and listen, I know we will find common ground. And Nevada is still a purple state. We have Democratic urban areas, but most of our rural areas are really red and Republican. But I show up and I walk into a room. I will walk into a room with a Cattlemen's Association, all these incredibly white men who have incredible stories to tell, who have worked for generations, their family, as cattle ranchers. And I know they didn't vote for me. So I will walk in the room and say, okay, I know you probably didn't vote for me, but you're stuck with me for the next 6 years. So let's just get something done. And you know what? We find common ground. And you know where we found common ground? Healthcare, access to healthcare. They're small business owners, they need healthcare. Immigration. What do you think's been working their farms and ranches? They are so supportive of addressing and making sure that individuals can come to this country to work, and they're supportive of putting them on a pathway to citizenship or giving them the opportunity to succeed. There are so many things, but you would not know that unless you went out there to talk to them. They are environmentalists. They work and love the land. And so if you want to talk to them about climate change and climate crisis and how we can sustain the land, they're going to be the first ones there, our farmers and ranchers, because they have to do it all the time. But we've never engaged them. And to me, that's what this is about. You've got to be willing to take the chance to go out there and then just talk with them and figure out where you can find that common ground. You're not going to agree on everything, but you are going to come to some common ground somewhere and find agreement where you can work together. And I don't think that happens quite often or enough. It doesn't happen enough, particularly in Congress right now.
You talked about the historic nature of your election and how after 200 plus years you were only the 50th woman, first woman ever from your state, first Latina ever. Why is it so hard? What are the obstacles that people from these communities face in breaking into the system?
Oh, that's going to take longer than our conversation here. Let me just say this. I think, let me just tell everybody who's listening, because as a woman and somebody who has fought, and believe me, most of my career is in law enforcement, and most of the people I dealt with were men around the law enforcement field. What I would tell everyone is, yeah, you're going to have barriers. You're going to have times when people are going to shut you out for reasons that you do not know, or reasons that they're going to be overt about. But at the end of the day, it's how you handle that. It's how you either want to educate or how you continue to move through that process and move over. There's no doubt in my mind, I was turned down for jobs that I really wanted. Because maybe I was a woman or of my background, you name it. But I didn't let it slow me down. And I think that's it. I think you have to continue to move forward. You have to figure out a way that you can still achieve what you're passionate about and move forward through that. And others helped me along the way. I didn't do it by myself. And that's the other piece of this. You don't hesitate to reach out and ask for that help from somebody and ask for assistance. A lot of the times we won't do that. And I think that's part of this. And once you get there, and this is why I feel so strongly about why I do this, is you don't forget where you came from and who helped you along the way, and that you now have a responsibility to help others and open that door even wider.
I was listening to an interview you did not long after arriving at the Senate. You were talking about sort of showing up and looking around and realizing that everyone else kind of looked the same, right? A lot of white men. And what really jumped out to me from this interview was you said, we should be mandating diversity in our committees, mandating diversity in our hiring practices, mandating diversity throughout the United States. Can you do that? What is,
yes.
Oh my God.
Yes.
About that a little bit.
Yeah, let me tell you, because this is why it's so crazy. You got to remember, now when I walk in to the Congress and to the Senate, this is an over 200-year-old institution that was mainly run by white men. And so the rules they passed were based on their focus and their perception of things. So when I first got there, and I'm on the Rules Committee, I still am on the Senate Rules Committee, I got asked to participate in a small group of senators to address some of our committee rules and make changes to them to update them. Now, got to remember this committee rules, probably the last time anybody looked at them was 100 years ago. And when I looked at the committee rules to look at, as we sit in our committees, how we bring diversity there and equality, and everybody has an opportunity to speak and ask questions, not anywhere, not one word or one time did I see in the Rules Committee the word diversity or the word bringing different people from different perspectives or different colors, but diversity did not exist. And so, and quite honestly, a woman did not exist, right? And so, so part of my fight was, okay, then we need to change this. We need to say that when we're creating these committees and the makeup of them, they have to be of a diverse nature, or they have to have a diversity associated with that. So we're pulling people from different perspectives in the creation of these committees. Now, that to me is a no-brainer, but you got to remember, we just changed that rule 3 years ago. And so that's what I'm saying is sometimes you've got to get into the system and say, okay, what the heck is going on here? And then figure out how you can make that change within the system. So that system change has taken place, and that's on the Democratic caucus side. When we create our committees and our committee assignments, there's mandated now diversity. And we've mandated diversity through our Senate offices on the Democratic side, that you have to, not only in your hiring diversity, but you can't just check the box and say, okay, I'm done. You have to figure out how you bring those different perspectives into your offices. And one thing I give Chuck Schumer credit for, there's many things I give him credit for, but this is one that he really understood and said, okay, we need to mandate through the Democratic caucus this idea that diversity not only doesn't matter, that we are going to do and make change about it. And so that's what we have done. And when I first got there, my goal was to say, okay, how do I bring more people of diversity working on Capitol Hill? Because everyone when I walked around was mainly white. And so I reached out to the Senate offices for, I had a meeting with some of the staffers who were Latinos. I had a meeting with some who were African American, Asian American, LGBTQ, Native American, anybody that I could talk to that was already on the Hill. And I said, okay, what were the barriers? What prevented you from getting here? And then what's preventing you from moving up the ranks and getting promoted? And we had this incredible conversation. And once I learned some of those barriers, then as a senator, it was important for me to start tearing those down. And part of that was many people of color don't have the opportunity to come to Capitol Hill to work or even intern because they don't have the means to be able to afford the room and board. Most of the people that are, even the interns that are on Capitol Hill, have either come from a school that will pay for the room and board, or they get a fellowship that will pay for it. But unless you can cover your costs, you're not going to be able to come. So that's why we made change and asked in the Senate that we passed, when we appropriated funds, we put additional appropriation aside to cover the costs of some of our interns so that they could come to Capitol Hill. I also created a scholarship in my office so that somebody that wanted to come, that was first generation, that didn't have the ability, couldn't go through a school or get a fellowship, didn't have the ability to cover the cost of room and board, then we would cover those costs for them. And I think that that's the kind of change that I'm looking for is, okay, how do we make it happen? Here's the problem, and now let's make it happen. And how do we continue to grow it? And that, to me, is important on Capitol Hill.
I got a lot more questions. I want to get to the student questions. So students, again, a reminder, this is a good opportunity to start submitting your questions via the Q&A tab below at the bottom of your screen. But before we turn to them, I got to turn to politics a little bit. Joe Biden announced before he became the presumptive nominee that he was going to select a woman as his running mate. Once he did that, your name immediately popped towards the top of many lists. You were apparently under active consideration, but just in the last couple of hours, you announced that you were withdrawing your name from consideration. Can you talk a little bit about that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, it's an honor just to be mentioned as a potential vice president running mate, and then an honor to be in the category of women that he's looking at, like the diverse women that I know, and there are, in their own right, trailblazers, and they are inspirational. So it was exciting and just an honor, very humbling to be thought of. And I am going to be there 100% for Joe Biden. To me, it is so important that we put him in the White House. But I also feel very strongly as United States Senator for Nevada. I was voted in by people of Nevada to represent them for 6 years, and they gave me that honor. And right now, Nevada's in the middle of a pandemic like everyone else, but we are so hard hit because we are a hospitality-based industry. Majority of our revenue in the state comes from gaming and tourism, convention space. It's hospitality. Over 400,000 workers in the state of Nevada are workers that work within this industry that have now been either furloughed or concerned about their future. Small businesses, the same. And so my focus really is on my state right now and ensuring that I continue to fight for those resources, that I continue to advocate where I can in the Senate to make sure that our industry and our economy in Nevada turns around much quicker. People have to realize when I was Attorney General, that was from during the time of 2007 to 2014. That was in the middle of our subprime crisis, our foreclosure crisis. And Nevada, again, was hard hit because of the nature of our industry. And I worked really hard as Attorney General to bring the resources back into our state and to ensure that we could bounce back. My goal now as Senator to do the same thing. Our economy has to recover, and I want it to spring back as quickly as possible. And that means my fight is in the Senate on behalf of the state of Nevada, and that's my commitment. I can't walk away from that right now.
Obviously, selecting a woman brings diversity to the ticket. Do you think it's important that he select a woman of color?
I think it's important that we get the best person for that job. And I think the best person is a woman. There's no doubt about it. Based on the women that are there, I am excited to see a woman being chosen. I am excited for all of these women. They bring different perspectives that we need, and that representation. Of course, I am biased in the sense that I know as a Latina, the impact that I can have on other Latinas and Latinos in my community. Because when I got elected, I will tell you, I got outreach by so many people. I tell this story all the time, but it is indicative of the story that I get from so many people when I meet them. When I was campaigning on the campaign trail, I got a letter from a 5th grader. She's a Latina, and she found out I was going to be the first Latina in the United States Senate, the first woman, and she was excited, and she was writing about it. And then towards the end of her letter, she said, I'm in the 5th grade. I'm running for student government. Do you have tips on how I can win? And so I thought, wow, if I got to meet her. So I pulled her in. We had a conversation, and I realized part of my responsibility as somebody who is now potentially going to be a senator and became senator is to make sure that these young Latinas and Latinos know that, one, I'm advocating on their behalf, that two, I'm going to pull them along with me, and that three, most importantly for me, is that if I can do this, they can do this too. And that's the one thing I want to get across to people, is that particularly these young girls that I get to meet, is that there are opportunities for them. And as I blaze this trail, and whatever you want to call it, my goal is to make sure that they know that, listen, the only thing I've done is work hard and make sure that I look out and advocate for others. And if this is something that you want to do, you can do it too, and follow your passion. Follow your passion, and it will take you where you want to go. And so for me, that's, I think, the key to all of this, is ensuring that when we get the right person in the VP, other people look at that, and young girls particularly look at that and say, wow, she did it. That means I can do it too. And that's what this is about.
All right, I'm gonna put a pin in my questions, and let's turn to the students. When we call on you, please introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you're studying, where you're Zooming in from, and what year you are in school. So first up is Jacob. Jacob, introduce yourself.
Good evening, Madam Senator. My name is Jacob. I'm a rising sophomore in the SFS. I'm studying international history, and I'm from Pittman, New Jersey. So my question is, there are members in our party right now who are advocating for Vice President Biden to begin reaching out to Black Americans right now. So what is your advice to our party about balancing our outreach to the Latinx community and the Black community so that neither feel like they're forgotten in this upcoming election?
Yeah, I think that's the best question, and that's what should be occurring. As here's what I know running for office in the state of Nevada that's so beautifully diverse is you can't show up at the last minute to any of our communities and say, oh, by the way, I want your vote. You have to start early. You have to be engaged. You have to be talking to them about the issues, and you have to be listening. It's the only way you're going to build a relationship. It's the only way, when you really want to ask for their support and their vote, then they know you, they know that you'll be an advocate on their behalf. They've talked with you, they've listened, they've heard, and they know that you've showed up before, and that you're not just showing up for a vote and then going to forget them after you get elected. And so it requires that to happen, and that engagement to happen early. And you need to be in those communities all across the country, engaging now. That means you have to have incredible staff. You have to have folks that know those communities, and you have to be working hard. And then you have to do the follow-up. Part of what I've always seen is you go into those communities, in our communities, and then we never hear from someone again. Well, you got to continue to show up. You've got to continue to be engaged on the issues that matter to those communities, and reaching out. And I think and know that Joe Biden, as he has done that, I've seen him do that here in Nevada. I know they're trying and doing, working as hard as they can across the country. He will be successful. But that's the recipe for success for any candidate, not just presidential. You've got to be there now and talking always.
All right, Jacob, thanks for the question. Let's turn to Jody, who's tuning in from the University of Nevada, Reno. Jody, you're on.
Hi, Senator Cortez Masto. I am a graduate student at the University of Nevada, Reno, and I also work at the university, your alma mater. I'd like to know, what do you think a graduate student, traditional and non-traditional alike, can do to help propagate diversity in our local areas, which then feed into larger state and national stages?
Yeah, thank you, Jody. Great to see you. It's a great question. I think first what I would do, figure out your passion, the issues that matter to you, because we all have those. And then figure out how you can work within the community, whether that is getting engaged with a group that similarly has the issues that you are passionate about, or working in local government, or volunteering on a campaign, or volunteering with a group on those issues. And then when you go in the door and you start working on whatever those issues are, you're also demanding at the same time the diversity. You should always, I mean, you know, and this is a great question, Jody, because I go back to this to so many people. Sometimes they think diversity is just I check that box and move on. That's not what this is. This is a paradigm shift. We are thinking this all the time. We are to the point that we no longer have to think about it because it's just happening at all levels. It's not a checkbox. It is diversity that is happening because that's who we are, and everybody now has an opportunity to work and live and love and wherever they want. But now we are obligated and we have a responsibility to demand it because it's not happening all the time and it's not automatically there. So until that paradigm shift happens, we have to demand it wherever we go.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jody. All right, next up, we've got Haley. Hey, Haley, why don't you introduce yourself to the senator?
Hi, Senator. Thank you again for being here with us. I'm a senior at Georgetown in the college studying economics and government. And my question for you has to do with, is there ever a moment that you had in your career where you changed your mind on something or your opinion shifted because of a bipartisan conversation or more education? Thank you.
Thank you, Haley. That's a great question. And yes, I know that not only do I think it's important we educate others, but we also have to be open to being educated. And sometimes that's hard, right? Sometimes we think we know everything and no, I come with this perspective and you're not going to change my mind. But you've always got to go in with the open mind to really be willing to listen to others and hear it from their perspective. And yes, that has happened in the Senate. That has happened in my career as Attorney General, particularly when I'm advocating on an issue or looking at legislation and laws that are going to have an impact on all of us. Key to having good law is making or ensuring before you pass it that you've reached out to all of the stakeholders, anybody who's going to be impacted by the law, and get them to weigh in to tell us, at least from my perspective, tell me your perspective, how this is going to impact you, and is this a good law or do we need to make changes? That's, to me, how good legislation is passed. I don't like unfunded mandates. I don't want unintended consequences. And to ensure that that occurs when we pass legislation, we coordinate. We bring everybody in who could be impacted, talk to them, let them see the legislation, hear from them, and then make changes where it's appropriate so that we are including everybody in the process. And that to me is good public policy.
Thanks, Haley. Next up, we've got Jay. Jay, you're on. Introduce yourself to the senator.
Hi, Senator. My name is Jay. I'm currently a graduate student, and I'm currently in Atlanta. And my question is, I'm sure that we're all familiar with the incidents that have been occurring over the years, from Trayvon Martin to, unfortunately, George Floyd, which was the most recent incident involving unarmed Black men and Black women. My question is, are there currently any laws being introduced to Congress to protect those who are unarmed, particularly those who are African descent, before, unfortunately, another incident occur again?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we need to address in this country. First of all, let's just start with a lack of enforcement, and we need enforcement, particularly what we have seen just recently in Minnesota with Lloyd George. The case is outrageous, and it calls for justice. To me, that's where part of this starts, is that there is justice and people are treated equally because the laws are already there. The laws already exist, and what is happening and why isn't there more of an outcry because of the lack of enforcement? That's where it starts, and making the changes there. I think there is an opportunity to look at this from a federal perspective and make sure we get it right. But we also have to include the states as well, because there are state laws and there are federal laws, and we need to make sure we are addressing both pieces of that as we look to addressing this long term. But from my perspective, as somebody who was a prosecutor and former law enforcement, I can tell you right now, some of the laws are not being enforced. And if they are being enforced, there's an abuse of force, and there should be accountability around it. And that's not happening.
Okay, Jay, thanks for the question. Let's turn to Carl, a student from UNLV.
Hello, my name is Carl Catarata. I'm a student at the UNLV College of Liberal Arts studying political science. Thank you so much, Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, for taking the time to talk to students and being so accessible. I greatly appreciate your service for us students, the Asian Pacific Islander community, and many of our diverse populations in the Silver State, putting all of us at the forefront of your agenda. An example was when your office had reached out to my family to share about our story when it came to family-based immigration in 2018. So I greatly appreciate your work and everything you do for us here in Nevada. So, my question for you is, in Nevada, we've seen from a report in the Washington Post in May 2019, women, specifically women of color, call the shots. To this day, Nevada has the first majority female legislature in the U.S. history. Being our U.S. Senator, what is one of or two of the largest legislative victories for communities of color that are most memorable in your tenure as our Senator?
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm not done yet, so I've been there the 3 years so far, but I will tell you, so I sit on 5 committees. I'm on Senate Finance, I sit on Energy and Natural Resources, I'm also on Banking and Housing Committee, Senate Rules Committee, and Indian Affairs. And I will tell you, every single one of those committees, I've either introduced or worked on passing legislation that impacts communities of color around housing discrimination, around healthcare discrimination, around education discrimination, and in so many other areas. Right now, I have several pieces of legislation addressing affordable housing and how we address the discrimination around affordable housing. I also have legislation dealing with healthcare in general and access to healthcare and discrimination around healthcare. Many in our tribal communities, and they quite often get left out, are discriminated against in general in so many areas. And so there's legislation that I've had to address that discrimination. I think it is important, and that's why when I talk about bringing this with me and living it and breathing it every day, no matter what committee I'm on, I'm always figuring out how you address that diversity piece and you knock down that discrimination so people are treated equally. Let me say this, one of the things that was most disturbing in the CARES Act that we passed is we left out whole communities of immigrants that don't have access to healthcare, free testing, didn't get direct payments because some in Congress felt it was okay to discriminate against them. So I signed on to a piece of legislation I co-sponsored with my colleagues so that we can make that change, and in the next legislative package fight so that those immigrant communities have access to and relief for resources that they need, just like everyone else during the middle of a pandemic. It's constant, and it's something that unfortunately we have to continue to address in society and in our country.
Thanks for the question, Carl. Let's take another student question. Nicholas, introduce yourself.
Senator, thank you for giving your time tonight, and thank you for acknowledging the LGBTQ community. I'm Nick Marak. I'm a veteran and current PhD candidate in the linguistics department here at Georgetown. In 2017, when the Trump administration implemented the trans ban in the military, you said that it's wrong and you will not stand for it. How will you continue to fight for our trans brothers, sisters, and siblings like Sergeant Sam Hunt? I really apologize, that's my dog, I swear.
That's okay.
From Nevada, who are integral to military readiness and who want to continue to serve our country.
Yeah, thank you. So many times, and not just in the military, but on so many issues, our trans community are being discriminated against in LGBTQ, and just so many. And that's why it requires continued vigilance and fighting. Part of this is introducing legislation or joining my colleagues on legislation that addresses the discrimination, whether it's in our military or amongst our veterans or just in general in any other area or field. But part of it, and people don't realize, is battling this administration who is rolling back regulations that were there to protect those communities. When I talked earlier about this administration rolling back regulations that protected individuals under the ACA from discrimination. That included our trans community and LGBTQ. Now there's concerns that they may not get access to healthcare under the ACA that they need because of this administration rolling it back. So we have to be vigilant also on what this administration is doing with regulations or rolling back those regulations so we can actually fight those as well and implement or challenge those. And that's what we do. So it's either legislation or challenging the regulations or writing letters or the oversight role that we have in the Senate, because we provide advice and consent to the administration on their appointments. Those individuals come before us. They have to report to Congress. And so we have an oversight role over this administration through our committee hearings. And that is an important role. And that's where you hold them accountable on the record and challenge them on what they're doing. I regularly do that in my committees around diversity and so many other areas where I see and have concerns about a lack of equality or resources going to all individuals.
Thank you, Nicholas. Senator, we're just about out of time, but I want to close with one last question. Stacey Abrams recently said, this was said in the context of the vice presidential selection process. She said, as a young Black woman growing up in Mississippi, I learned that if you don't raise your hand, people won't see you and they won't give you attention. And I thought that was a very profound statement, right? If you're not putting yourself out there, you can't expect to be put to get that seat at the table. A lot of people put up their hand this year in the race for the Democratic presidential nomination. But the two candidates left standing at the end were both older white men. And not to detract from them, but I think there were a lot of people from underrepresented communities that looked at that and felt a little discouraged. I'm wondering what your message is to those people who see others from their communities putting their hands up, trying to get attention, but falling short. What's your parting words here?
Yeah, I don't think they fell short. And if you look at the Democratic presidential candidates who were running, we had a diverse group of individuals. Compare that to what the Republicans had. I mean, the Democrats, think about this. We had women of color. We had so many different perspectives represented, LGBTQ. I mean, it was a diverse group of individuals. And as Democrats, that's who we are. Now, we have to narrow it down. But at the end of the day, that's who we are as Democrats. And we open the door to that diversity. But yes, are we going to have to ultimately narrow it down to one candidate? Yes, we are. But we're going to hold that candidate accountable for all of the issues that we all care about. We bring that diversity to them, and we demand that diversity and that kind of perspective from the individual that we elect as a Democrat. And to me, that's what this is about. Look how far we have come. And that's why I say, you asked me about being nominated as a VP. To me, just looking at the caliber of women and the diversity there, it's who we are as Democrats, but just who we are as a country. It's not, I think our country is beautifully diverse. And we need to now demand that diversity in our government and wherever else we can be, and it needs to continue to grow. And I am proud of the Democrats in the sense that we have that beautiful diversity. And I don't think we are slowing down. Let me say one final thing here. I know we're not slowing down because everybody who's participating, particularly this generation, they're demanding it. They're the voting bloc of the future. And they are demanding that change. They are already have made that paradigm shift, and they are moving us beyond that. And that's why I'm excited about this younger generation and what they bring to this country. It's beautiful. And the diversity is, to me, needed. And they're the ones that are going to make the change. It's an exciting time. I kind of wish I was part of their generation, quite honestly. It's an exciting time for all of us. But we've got to hold people accountable, and we've got to make that demand. And we have that responsibility always to demand that diversity. So let me just say thank you for the conversation, and to everyone who asked a question and those that didn't get to, thank you for participating. And it was an exciting evening where you are, and so appreciate the conversation.
Well, I've long believed that more diversity is a good thing. It's good for the Democratic Party. More diversity in public life is good for the Republican Party. It's good for policy making. It's good for government. It's good for business. It's good for all of us. And so, Senator, I want to thank you for your long fight to bring more diversity into public life and for fighting for the issues that impact the affected communities. So thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. And to all of you who tuned in, thank you for spending part of your evening with us. Please keep following us at GU Politics to find out about our upcoming summer programming. And with that, thank you all and good night.